course, then you replied, you know, before I became the Pope only 3 weeks ago, I really enjoyed driving. I'd drive for hours, but now no one will allow me to drive anywhere. Would you mind if we switch places and I can drive? You can see exactly where this is going, don't you? Anyway, the limousine driver agreed and the two switched places. After a while, the Pope begins to relax. He turns on the radio. I don't know if he's listening to the sound or the breeze. Hangs his arm out the window and enjoys cruising along. However, not aware of his increasing speed, he was soon pulled over by a motorcycle cop. Anyway, the cop walked up to the limousine, saw who was driving, and said, "Excuse me, Your Holiness," for a moment, and then returned to his bike on the radio. And he said, "Chief, I think we've got a problem. I believe I pulled over someone pretty important, and I'm not too sure how to deal with it." And the chief responded, "Don't tell me you pulled over the state representative again, did you, Johnson?" And he said, "No, I think the person's more important." He said, "Well, is it the senator? Is it a presidential motorcade?" And he says, "No, I think this is even more important." And he said, "Who really? Who's way more important than President Trump?" And he said, "Well, I don't know, but Pope Leo's driving." You can see that coming miles away, couldn't you? There's a small village in Cambridgeshire in England too called Little Gidding, and in 1625 Nicholas Ferrar had been successful in business as well as politics, and with his little family he followed a rule of daily prayer. He educated children in the village and cared for those who were poor and sick, and the community came to an end after the horrible English Civil War ripped apart that country, but it's still commemorated as a small chapel of St. John. T.S. Eliot put together a set of poems back in 1936 entitled The Four Quartets, and Little Gidding, that place where Nicholas Ferrar set up his community, is the last of those poems. And anyway, T.S. Eliot says, what we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is actually to make a beginning. And Luke begins his gospel, of course, as you heard, in the Temple of Jerusalem. Well, you didn't hear that, but you would have heard it if you read Luke's gospel. An angel announces to Zechariah the joyful promise of the birth of John the Baptist. And the final scene, as you heard in today's gospel, is also in the temple. The apostles are full of joy and they praise God. And Acts of the Apostles, of course, same person, same Luke, talks about going back to the gospel where everything Jesus has done has been taught from the beginning. And almost immediately he goes on to his ascension. And as you heard, a cloud takes Jesus away from the apostles' sight. And as at the beginning of Luke's gospel, so too at the end of the reading from the Acts of the Apostles too, is that angel's message, full of joy, just like the one that was passed on to Zechariah. And the angel's message is that Jesus, who has been taken up to heaven, will come back. Luke takes us from the beginning to the end, and from the end to the beginning, which can be confusing at times, but like the Pope driving a limo. But the beginning of Acts of the Apostles is the end of the gospel story, all those stories.